Hey, what's up guys? Hope everyone's doing really well. As usual, video for this week is going to be a little bit of a story time kind of video. It's another popular question that I've been asked in the comments and stuff, but it's kind of how I've made various switches throughout my career. So I haven't had a career that's too long. I started working in 2010, so it's been 7 or 8 years. It's not crazy long, but I have been through a few kind of significant things, at least for me. So a few people have asked, what have you gone through? How did you switch positions over time? And I thought it'd be pretty cool if I just shared that story a little bit more in depth in this video, and hopefully some of the stuff I've been through, you guys can relate to it and it can help with whatever you might be going through. All right. So I thought of three major kind of inflection points in my career so far since I started working in 2010. I hope there are more inflection points, but if I had to choose the top three, these are going to be them. What I mean by inflection point is kind of just a significant moment in my path where things started to change. All right, and I copied the word inflection point from another book. There's this really good book by Andy Grove. I'll put a link in the description, but he wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive, where he talks about company and career inflection points. And if you guys don't know Andy Grove, he passed away last year, but he was the CEO of Intel for a long period of time. He's a legend. Intel is one of the most fundamental, crazy, important companies of all of time. So I'll have a link for that book, and I highly recommend anyone check that out. So anyways, so 3 inflection points for my career personally, and I'm hopefully going to tie in a couple lessons I learned and bits of advice that hopefully are helpful. All right, so what are the 3 inflection points? But let me just list them off real quick. But the first one is going to be when I went from super low level software to high level software. That's the first one. The second one is high level software into startups, or corporate into startups. And the third and final inflection point is from startup to different startup. All right, so without further ado, let's just get into the details. So before we get into these career inflection points, there's actually a inflection 0 that I want to talk about. So that inflection point is actually right in between working and school. So a ton of stuff happened during college, during school, and then there's also a big inflection point there when it all switched to kind of professional work. So before we get into those professional pivot points for me, let's talk a little bit about what it was like just during school. To summarize what it felt like trying to get a job at the end of school, I can summarize it in one sentence. It's just take what you can get. There are always a few select people, like the 5%, the 1%, the top students that could really be choosers. I always call them choosers because they could really choose exactly where they wanted to work because they were so good. They had offers from Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook. The top companies were all competing for a certain select group of really high level students, but the majority of people aren't in that group. So some people can choose where they're gonna work. I'm gonna choose my Google offer over my Microsoft offer. Well, good for you, that's cool. But the vast majority of us weren't really choosers. I wasn't really a chooser. A lot of my friends weren't. For us, it was really just take what we can get. Take the best opportunity that is thrown at us, and we can't really choose the option between Facebook or Amazon. So let me just describe the CMU culture a little bit. It might be different now, but back when I went to CMU, 2005 to 2009, they did not really focus on entrepreneurship. So they didn't focus on startups. They didn't talk about any of that stuff. They didn't focus on the up and coming companies, but all they focused on, everything you're judged on is how good of a company you could work at after college. So the people that got into the Googles were much better than the people that got into lesser companies. But so it's either you work for a brand name company, you work for not so brand name company. A lot of people went into finance, and a lot of people went into government contracting work, when you work on radars and missiles. I think the major thing I learned during this time period is that just you have to manage your expectations really well when you're really fresh or doing something completely new. very few people have the ability to kind of choose exactly their path of where they want to go. I was always stressed out. I was overly stressed out at the time just because everyone else next to me was getting better job offers at better companies that I couldn't get. So that was stressing me out. And my expectation for myself was that I should be at that level. But actually, the thing I learned just later on is that always manage the expectations just for yourself. When you're really new, you don't have the ability to choose exactly your path. You really have to take what you can get sometimes and just be grateful. It's always a blessing if you can get something. So don't set your expectations too high, always keep it level, and don't compare yourself with a lot of other people. So a lot of you might be thinking, oh Dave, you already worked at Qualcomm, that's a great company. You're complaining about working there rather than working at Google. Like, you're quit being a bitch. Like, you already got a really great job. What I have to say for that is that even though that's true, I'm super grateful for being able to work at Qualcomm, which is like a great Fortune 500 company or whatever. But regardless of that, I think the core of it, it's always relative, right? You can be at any position in life, and things that you can get versus things that you don't get, it's all relative, and it all kind of hurts people the same way. So don't be too quick to judge people just because they're upset over some outcome in their life. Like, you might think someone's an asshole when they have like a Porsche and they really want a Ferrari, but that's just relative for them, right? From an outsider, they might seem like an asshole, but in that person's world, which is actually what matters for their mind, it's all relative. So like, I'm complaining a little bit here about how I was stressing of not getting to work at Google. Oh shit, I have to go at Qualcomm, which is sub-tier. But all this stuff is relative. All right, so just keep that in mind when you're kind of comparing different people's circumstances. All right, so finally, that was a really long intro, but finally I want to get into these 3 inflection points I had during my career. I want to talk about the first one they're all important, so let's just talk about the first one. The first inflection point I had was when I went from really, really low level software to working on some high level software. So this is like working in C, always just writing sequential level, boring C code, moving up to C++ and some higher level software design. So there's 2 major points which led me to switch jobs like this at the time. One is that I was really curious to understand what kind of real software was about, because the stuff I was doing was really, really low level. Some people might not even consider it real software development. It's so level. And secondly, I didn't have too good of a relationship with my manager at the time. So I'm not going to talk about the manager side of things right now, but I'm going to focus on the tech side of things. So first, I just want to give people an understanding of how low level some of this code was and how it's not so glamorous, even though it might sound kind of cool. So all of this is very sequential style C code. So it's just C code that just has to execute in some order and do the right thing. And the code we were writing was actually being executed before the operating system even loads into memory. So there's no dynamic memory, there's no malloc, like there's no virtual memory. Like, it's very different environment. You're writing like such specific C code that it's just, I'm not going to say it's simple, but once you get the hang of it, there's not too much room for flexibility. Like, there is a way to do everything. So what I was really curious about at this point was I was really curious to learn what like bigger software design was all about. I was reading other people working on like huge software projects, you know, like crazy software projects, high level languages, doing really cool things, and I was stuck writing like C. So that was actually the main curiosity point that triggered me to want to get into higher level software. So for anyone who's working and might have similar feelings that I did, it's kind of like, I'm doing this, I've been doing this for a long period of time, I'm curious about what this other thing is like. I would only say, before you jump ship and move on to something else, do you really understand what the technical work you're doing right now is all about? To understand if you really like something or not, you have to actually understand it first, right? Or be involved in it significantly first. I hear a lot of people saying so many hypothetical things on YouTube like, oh, I'm gonna love web programming. Oh, I'll love game development. Like, do you even know what game development is like? I hear a lot of people are saying stuff like that. Like, they really see themselves doing game development when they've done zero game development. So I think if you really want to judge something technically, you have to get involved in it significantly to at least understand it. All right, so I was 2 years super low level C programming. I kind of understood what it'd be like, and I acknowledged that it wasn't something I wanted to do, so I wanted to get into higher level stuff. All right, so the second major inflection point that I had in my career was going from high level software in a corporate setting to startups. So fast forward 2 years from that first inflection point, I got out of the low-level software department. I transferred to Qualcomm's R&D department. It was a crazy interview process. It was actually kind of like interviewing for a new job. I did like 6 rounds of interviews to get into that R&D position, and they were doing like these crazy C++ projects. That's what I wanted to do, and I just got into it. I was too scared to leave the company, so I just kind of switched departments, but it wasn't easy to just switch departments. So R&D at big corporate companies is pretty cool. It feels very academic. You're actually doing kind of research-like things. You get a ton of funding from your company, and you work on stuff just to experiment with it. This is when I was working on this cool like hypothetical neural processor, kind of like to power a Terminator, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was like a crazy concept. It was definitely really out there, but that's what R&D is all about, right? Taking money and pushing it into crazy ideas, hoping it becomes a real idea. So this was the position where I kind of first learned C++. It was also about 2 years. I came from C to C++. It was my first experience with like higher level programming, like software design techniques, software patterns. There's actually programmings run with an operating system. I had to worry about memory, crashes, segmentation faults, all that good stuff. So it was actually technically very different. It was exactly what I wanted technically coming from the low level world, but after a while there was actually something else missing that caused this second inflection point. The main reason I started feeling like something had to change was that I wasn't being fulfilled on a non-technical level at this position. So what do I mean by that? I was very fulfilled technically. It was like cool C++ programming. It was very technically cool, but it wasn't very fulfilling outside of tech. Because one, it was very academic. If you guys know what academic means, it's very R&D. Nobody was using our product. Like we would put in hours to make this thing, and nobody would use it. Who would use it? We didn't have one customer. This is a little depressing, right? You put a lot of like hours into coding something and no one using it. That never feels very good. The reason I started kind of getting into startups, one, obviously they're very hot and trendy, all that stuff. Can't deny that startups are very trending these days, but one thing that they always advertise was that at a startup, you can work directly on something that you could sell to a customer, productize, show people. You could like, the work you did was easily displayable to someone. I wouldn't be in like this weird R&D silo where all this stuff I was doing was thrown away. I could be in a place where I could work on stuff and show it off to people, and it could actually be useful. So this transition was also very hard, coming from a corporate world to a startup world. If you ever apply at startup companies, they're very like biased. They always favor people that have startup experience, and they kind of like push back against people that are too corporate. So I had like an uphill battle to play, but it was all right. So I just knew that I didn't want to work in San Francisco because I didn't really like the Bay Area too much. I wanted to work at some startup where I could make a difference to many people, and I didn't have much going for me, right? I had like all the wrong technical skills. If you guys know anything about startups, most startups, 99% of them use web technologies like Ruby on Rails, web programming, full stack developer, front-end developer, mobile developer, all that stuff. Very rarely do startups need like a C++ developer. So I had the complete wrong skill set for startups. That's why it was really difficult for me to get in. One crazy story I had was I applied to Rap Genius back when they were really small, and I like cold emailed the CEO, or I forget who he was, cold emailed one of the founders of Rap Genius, just seeing if there could be any positions opening, and he was just like, can you show me any website you have? And I was like, shit, I don't have a website to show him. So I got that email, I spent 1 month, I built this portfolio website where you can code in the browser. I built that in a month, and then I emailed the guy back and be like, oh, here's the URL to this site I just made to show that I could do web programming, and he never responded to me. So that sucked. This is when CMU really came to save me, because the only reason some startup companies would talk to me was because they read that I went to CMU, and that name just kind of carried through to just get in the door for interviews. But a lot of startups just like shut the door on me real quick because they saw I didn't have real web programming experience. They're like, oh, this guy did C and C++. Like, you can't contribute to like our startup cool stack. So that was like pretty tough, but I kind of had CMU as my baseline to get me in a little bit. And eventually I talked to one company that didn't mind that I was doing C++ for so long, and they gave me a chance at their startup. So for anyone watching, I think one thing that really helped me at this point was that I thought that if I was technically fulfilled, I would be completely happy, right? I wanted to work on C++, I wanted to do software development, I wanted to do all this cool high-level programming, and I got to do that finally, but I still have this like empty hole inside of me because something else wasn't fulfilled. So I think if you fulfill yourself technically, that could get you like 30, 40, maybe 50% of the way there, but there's still a large part of that fulfillment which isn't technical. So I think it was just a good lesson for me. So if anyone out there is just thinking like, oh, if I work on this technical stuff, I'm going to be so happy. If I can work on game programming, I'll be so happy. That's not going to get you really fulfilled in the long run, and just be aware of that. All right, so when you're just considering different potential paths to take, don't just take the one that's only what you want to do from the technical perspective. Just ask yourself, like, how do I be fulfilled in both parts? Like technical stuff and then this mushy-gushy stuff. All right? The third, this is a long video, but the third and last inflection point that I went through in my career was startup to startup. So coming from corporate to startup was already a big change, but then once you're actually working within startups, there's so many different ones to choose from, right? Startup A is different from startup B. They're all very, very different. So the startup I joined was I like to call it consumer focused. We were working on like this new cool mobile app to replace Chrome potentially. So it was a consumer product. It was like a tangible product, and this is actually what I wanted to do coming out of the corporate world, right? I wanted to work on a product that real people use, potentially many people use. I wanted my code to be seen, and this was the startup to do it, right? They were working on like a really kind of visionary product. I think the one downfall that kind of led to this next inflection point was that all the eggs were in this one product. They were banking on this product to be like a Snapchat or Instagram and really lift them off, and it never really happened. So what caused this next inflection point was that I actually wanted to learn what it was really like to start a real business, like with a real business model, and actually run a company. I feel like a lot of those startups that are just focused on one product, it's kind of like a well-funded way to work on your pet project, right? You haven't proven anything. All you have is this visionary idea that you want to get to, and you're banking everything. You're putting all your eggs into the basket and banking on that works, and it's probably not going to work. So the experience that I wanted to get after realizing this, was that I wanted to be a part of like a real business, like a real operation. So that's when I started looking for different startups that were more business oriented. So this eventually led me to find this next startup, which I'm actually currently working at. I'm not going to talk too much about it here because the important part here is just the transition point. But what I found in this next startup, which I really liked, is that they have a real business model. They have a way to make money, and they were even able to make money before we built any technology for it. So it just shows that it's not like a really visionary, like, oh, what if we built Instagram again? This was like, we've developed a business model, we planned it out, we have the operation, we know how to make some profits. everything was planned out, so it made a lot of sense what we worked on technically. So I know many people don't like this style. I think everyone is really different. Some people are a little more visionary. Some people like to just sit and be like Steve Jobs. Other people like to actually get their hands dirty and actually build a real business, and I was just gravitating more towards that side. I wanted to be a part of like the real operation and how it ran. So that's what led to that inflection point, and that's where I'm working right now. Alright guys, to wrap up this third inflection point between startup and startup, I think the major takeaway is that just recognize every company is very different. Alright, just between startups. This was a major inflection point for me, this third one, like startup to startup, but I think it's actually less significant than my other two. I actually think the first two were more like game changing for me. This third one was just me kind of tweaking what I wanted to work on, and it was a little more controlled. The other two were like, shit, something's wrong, I gotta change. The last inflection point was getting a little more controlled where I knew what I wanted to go towards, but that's easier said than done, obviously. So that was the last inflection point, startup to startup, and everything is different, right? So if you're considering working at a startup, just take really good care and trying to understand what that startup is like compared to some other startup you're considering. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. Long video again, more of a story. I just hope that some of the stuff I talked about is relatable. You guys can relate to it, hopefully apply it to something you're going through or might be going through in the future, and it helps you. Alright, so a lot of this stuff, as I was moving, I really didn't know what was going on, but like when I just think about it in retrospect, everything had like not a clear purpose, but it developed me in a different way. So just watch out for those inflection points in your life and take care when you're going through them, because you don't think it's a big deal when it's happening, but then after you realize like it makes crazy differences in your career, life, all that stuff. Last random point I just want to put out there is that always make sure to give stuff second chances. When I was in college, I had a couple bad internships which turned me really off to web programming. Like I had one internship where I vowed that I'm not going to write CSS or JavaScript again. This stuff sucks. Like I don't want to write it. And now that's exactly what I'm doing now. So it's kind of like give stuff a second chance. Like I thought I wasn't going to be a web developer when I was in college. I thought, oh no, web development is not for me. And then after all these pivots and turns, I'm now doing web development full time. So don't be too quick to judge something that you don't like. All right, and that's the last thing I wanted to mention here. But other than that, I hope this story time was helpful for you. It's just kind of strange for me to recount everything that's happened to me. But anyways, it's been a popular question that people have asked. I hope it's helpful. I hope it's relatable. Please ask me any questions if you want, and see everyone next week. All right, later.